Welcome and good morning and welcome everyone. So we are in the session 4A, Health, Safety and Wellbeing. So I'm Robby Soetanto. I work at Loughborough University. I'm going to chair this session, and Niraj is going to support this session as a moderator as well. So we have 3 papers in this session. We have probably about 1 hour or less than 1 hour by now, but I will play the presentation, and then we spend 5 to 10 minutes for questions for that specific papers. And once we go through the 3 papers, at the end, if we have spare time, we have a bit of discussion. And at the moment, we are in the presentation mode, and if we have a reasonable number within the limit, we can change to discussion mode as well at the end. I hope that's okay. So for your information, the session will be recorded, and I'll start recording. Yeah. Okay, so let's start the presentation by now.
Hello everyone. The research I'm going to present is on the state practice of managing heat stress in Singapore. The major research work was done by Roxanne, a student of Prof. Yunyan at National University of Singapore. This paper was part of my last drop in Prof. Gau's research team. Heat stress from the climate is a systemic hazard on construction projects, as it not only causes heat illnesses, but also increases the chance of other accidents, such as fall from height through workers' impaired concentration in heat. So it takes system thinking to manage. The theoretical perspective of this paper is on the importance of engaging with local conventions in managing health and safety of working in heat. Local conventions are cultural cognitive institutions embedded in workers' mentalities and habits. They are part of the context that does not change much in the duration of a project-based job, but they contain coping strategies that can tackle the local hazards more effectively than the externally imposed rules would do. Thus, when making and enforcing the safety rules, we need to consider the interaction between the formal rules and local conventions. When safety rules are configured against local culture, they are least effective in achieving behavioral goals. Workers coming from a different climate zone took longer time to adapt to the site climate. This is mainly due to the adjustment of personal life routines. In Hong Kong, the herbal tea used to be a local convention of coping with heat. When it was replaced by vending machines of bottled drinks, the cost was multiplied and shifted to the workers, which not only restricted their opportunities of cooling, but also introduced new health risks through the artificially flavored, heavily sugared drinks from the vending machine. Local coping conventions in Chongqing, China, is a vernacular medicine, agratem liquid, which helps boost human immune system and calm down digestive system and heat. In Singapore, the coping convention is wearables. Why? Because the climate of Singapore is a tropical rainforest climate characterized by high uniform temperature and high humidity, added by urban heat island effect. Therefore, shade or ventilation or even bricks do not make much difference to the heat load on workers. Cooling through wearables is the local convention for effective tackling heat stress while keep the work going. The aims of this research are, in general, to review the practice of managing heat stress in Singapore's construction industry, and in particular, to evaluate the effectiveness of a water cooling headgear used by workers for mitigating heat stress on site. The headgear under test is made of anti-static and antibacterial fiber, which is lightweight and soft, effective in absorbing and retaining water. This is a product innovation which utilizes water evaporation effect for cooling and provides UV protection from the sunlight. The sample was 30 workers on site, half rebar and half carpenters. The experimental study was conducted for 2 weeks period on site while workers were in their Euro practice. We divided the participant into an experimental group and a control group and switched the groups in week 2 so that each participant had a chance to wear the headgear and experiment. So the control group and the experimental group were the same people of different times with and without the headgear. We measured workers' body temperature with a thermal imagery. Concurrent to the environmental heat monitoring and recording, the first author conducted participant observation and 6 focus group interviews on site during their tea breaks. So in data analysis, we first compared the environmental heat stress levels of the 2 groups to confirm that the experiment group and the control group were working in the same thermal condition. Second, we compared the recorded body temperature data between the 2 groups and found a statistical difference, a significant difference between the body temperatures of the 2 groups. Third, we did content analysis with the ethnographic data to triangulate and contextualize the quantitative results. Lastly, we undertook a broader document search on Singapore's policies, laws, and regulations to ground the findings into the institutional context. The triangulated results are: workers did perceive a trend of increasing number of hot days in Singapore. Climate change is real in construction. The water cooling headgear had a significant cooling effect, and as a cooling method, it is consistent with local coping conventions with workers' habits and behavioral patterns. The majority of workers support permanent implementation of this headgear, but there were 3 concerns: its cost and its increased weight on the head and its frequent soaking need, which had some interference with the work, and there were some ergonomic problems to solve. In conclusion, this research, we embedded an experimental study in a practice as Euro site context, and we paralleled it with an ethnographic study for understanding coping conventions, and other cultural cognitive institutions in the local context. The experimental research is limited by its small sample size and the accuracy of our instruments. But in spite of these limitations, this is the first study on the practice of heat stress management in Singapore. We also tested thermal imagery as a usable, non-intrusive tool for quick body temperature screening on site to keep workers safe in heat. Our research contributes to the design for safety body of knowledge, particularly on the design of wearables in this case. Further research is in two directions. One is for a full-scale review of practice in Singapore's construction industry, because our study is supposed to be a pilot study. Another is to identify appropriate technologies for automating the water cooling headgear. This is a topic for technological innovation. Thank you. We welcome for any comments, observations, or questions or suggestions. Thank you very much for your time.
Thank you, Andrea, for really interesting research presentations. So I think probably we have at least one question in the chat. And we have probably about 12 now. Yeah, 12 participants are open for discussion. I would like to invite to the floor if there is any question for Andrea. Roy? Roy, are you there? You got a question there? Do you want to ask question directly, or shall I ask Andrea? Okay, so Roy asked question: was the study coordinated by the contractor for worker to agree to participate in the experimental comparison, and also ethical approval and things like that? Is there any
yes, of course. The ethics approval in Singapore is very, very strict, especially in US. So this got a very strict process of ethical approval. And the engagement on site with the contractors was quite substantial. And the student was on site for 2 weeks and discussed with everybody on site. With also the focus group interview was facilitated by site manager and some bilingual workers, because most of them are migrant workers, different languages. So every discussion had to be translated into some of a native language of the workers.
Mm-hmm. Okay. Yeah. Well, I mean, it's I read the paper and I think I'm quite fascinated with the finding. So I'm just wondering, because I mean, I think in Singapore generally temperature variation is not that high, and over a year normally the temperature is around 20, on the top 20 to 30. Sometimes it could reach mid 30s. So in the UK here we have occasional influx, very high temperature on certain summer months. And it could last for a couple of weeks, and definition of extreme extreme hot weather is probably 3 consecutive days where the temperature won't drop below 25 or something. And and during the daytime for construction worker is very challenging. I'm just wondering, what is your view on that in terms of applicability of the finding in different climates, especially in the northern Europe, where hot climate is not common, and we got a few days very hot temperature, and that's it. But there has been an issue, particularly with the ability of a construction worker to actually cope with it.
Yes.
So what's your view, Andrea?
I think Europe has quite good management of the climate. I mean, it's but not so much in construction industry, but to the general public, the forecast of heat wave and heat stress, like predicted in WBGT, this is available to the general public in Europe, but and also now Singapore adopted like this WBGT because it's a synthesis of temperature, humidity, and solar radiation. That's a synthesis index so that the public can know what is the level of heat stress. But when we did that in Hong Kong, the observatory was reluctant to do that because that's a lot of work for them to do. So I think for Europe and UK, it's the problem is to transfer this specific to the construction industry. But it's currently available to the general public, but not specific enough to tackle construction issues on construction site.
Mm-hmm. Okay. Well, I mean, so in terms of recent heat waves, some part of Europe is up to 43, 45 degrees centigrade, which is a significant major influx of hot temperature. And I think during that situation, some construction site has to stop. And that's probably something that already happening in some part of some country in the Middle East as well, in terms of how to worker cope with hot temperature. To my understanding, one of my PhD students actually mentioned about they have to stop only certain time of the day and then carry on working after 5 o'clock or so. Anyway, we got further message from Ruijin. Maybe quite the opposite. Working in cold environment can be the problem here in the northern part of Europe. Worker unsung hero as yeah. Well, yes. And I quite agree as well with that message. During the cold climate, I think below certain degrees centigrade, we have to stop as well.
I think in the cold areas, the issue is acclimatization. Like the workers used to the cold weather, they are more vulnerable to hot weather because they are not used to it. They need adaptation. Now, I think we manage heat stress for workers' safety and health. We don't now just praise them as heroes of working in heat, but it's our responsibility to protect them, to be safe in heat.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Okay, thank you. So let's move on to the next presentations.
Hi, I'm Shanthi Senathirajah, a human factors researcher at Anglia Ruskin University, and I'm here to present my team's research on resilience engineering and construction safety. The construction industry is one of the largest in the world economy, yet it has a statistically higher injury rate than all other industries. Remarkable improvements have been made over the years, however, we appear to have reached a plateau. so occupational safety in construction still remains a concern. This has resulted in the potential of applying systemic thinking to manage safety, which is where the concept of resilience engineering comes in. So, what is resilience engineering, or RE as I may refer to it? Traditionally, we look at safety as the absence of things that go wrong. And this is all well and good when systems are simple and linear. But over time, systems and organizations have become increasingly complex as demands rise, so the simple approach to looking at safety has its limits. Many of us, I'm sure, have experienced having a plan, but things not going exactly according to plan in reality, and this is not uncommon in construction. So resilience engineering is a different paradigm of safety management that proposes an alternative way to conventional safety thinking. It instead focuses on how people cope with the complexity and variability to achieve success. And we need to look at this everyday work and understand how it functions and why it functions. And we must accept this because the majority of the time it is successful. We find people can cope, adapt, and adjust their performance in response to a situation. And it's this very same adaptive capacity and behavior, which is why things go mostly right, but sometimes wrong. So there are some requirements for a system's performance to be resilient, and this is by anticipating events, threats, and opportunities in the future, monitoring events which could seriously affect the organization's performance, either positively or negatively, being able to effectively respond to changes to suit the new conditions, and being able to learn from all experiences by understanding what goes right as well as what goes wrong. So resilience is more about what an organization does and how it performs rather than what it has. And resilience engineering looks to enhance the ability to succeed under varying expected and unexpected conditions. Resilience engineering is applied to various high-risk and complex sectors such as aviation, nuclear, and healthcare. But there's a lack of empirical evidence to validate the constructs of RE in construction. There are tools to measure resilience, but we purposely stepped away from this because we wanted to address the gap in the literature to draw out the nuances of the lived realities of the work environment in construction. So we carried out 100 semi-structured interviews with direct and subcontracted employees of an organization and used discourse analysis to explore how workers understand, manage, and adapt in both positive and negative ways. And this particular organization is accredited to a high standard of safety management, so it can be considered quite representative of best practice within the industry. Overall, 6 dominant discourses emerged from the data, many which had subcomponents, and these at times informed and influenced each other. So I'll just talk through a couple of these. A dominant discourse that emerged from the data is safety matters. This reflects a shared prioritization of safety at the heart of the organization and was also identified on a personal level. But there's also a shared understanding between office staff and site-based supervisors and operatives that they cannot guarantee safety, regardless of what measures are put in place or how well the rules are followed, because there's always an unknown factor that you cannot control. As such, there is a limit to safety. This is associated with the notions of work as imagined or planned versus work as done, and the complexities of the workplace itself. For example, this particularly came out in the talk of utility strikes. So even though these occurrences can have significant consequences, this discourse was positioned such incidents as not completely preventable due to external factors which are outside of their control. Operatives are very familiar with this reality of their workplace, so they do use positive workarounds, such as avoiding excavating in specific areas or by digging very carefully. But these activities are already common practice, resulting in a shared understanding that they cannot realistically be any safer whilst remaining productive and efficient. People do not intentionally go out to get hurt. People behave in a way that they've calculated to be safe enough, but this can unfortunately end in an incident. And this acceptance and understanding of the complexity of reality is seen as essential to enable resilience engineering in practice. The realities of the sharp end must be considered when anticipating on safety, and so a flexible approach is needed to deal with such complexities in practice. But as the data shows, this is easier said than done, and therefore it raises challenges in operational safety management. A limit to safety was linked with the bureaucracy of safety, which is again associated with the conflicts between work as imagined and work as done. The data clearly revealed the non-linear nature of safety and unsafety in reality, and the application of rules and procedures were described as a grey area, which was linked to the practical differences between the site conditions operatives were actually experiencing with what had been planned for in the office, as well as differing interpretations of the rules in practice when unsafety occurred. Managers demonstrated a desire to empower workers to use their observational skills to anticipate situational needs and respond accordingly, which suggests an RE approach would benefit here. But the construction sector is traditionally governed by very specific safety rules, so such a flexible approach struggles to work in this space. The complexities of such situations result in a lack of clarity for workers who wonder if they're doing the right thing or not by bending the safety rules. The fear of consequences and the behaviors that result from this thinking is grounded in the traditional way of looking at safety, which reveals a lack of resilience. As humans, we try to achieve a satisfactory result whilst minimizing negative costs. The error isn't what causes the risk of the incident, but it is losing control and awareness of the compromises between acceptable risks and the ability to manage the situation. This again demonstrates the nuanced complexities of the workplace. Just because someone's not been involved in an incident, it doesn't mean that they've been engaging in what might traditionally be seen as the right behaviors. So it's important to understand how they succeeded in these conditions. These positive and negative aspects of flexibility around safety reveals a potential challenge for resilience engineering in construction. There was evidence of human capability for situational flexibility within the data, which was in fact positioned as an important quality. For example, take the role of the supervisor. A number of fluctuating pressures are thrown their way, yet they adapt to the situation to sustain operations without thinking, which suggests an innate resilience within. They are able to balance the sources of risk and safety to increase the chance of producing a safe outcome. This definitely creates potential for an RE approach. However, there appeared to be a lack of confidence in the coherence of the system as a whole, as the conflicts and complexities of the workplace were reflected in the data. In order for the organization to demonstrate resilience, it is important that this mindset and behavior of situational flexibility expands across the organization from the blunt end in the office to the sharp end on site. So we've provided empirical evidence that resilience is readily identifiable in this organization. The data revealed there are opportunities for a resilience engineering approach to safety management in guiding and facilitating how people cope and adapt to handle the complexities of the workplace. But the data also revealed the operational management challenges in having such a flexible approach in what is a traditionally top-down governed industry. To continue with research in this area, we should explore how to operationalize these findings to increase overall occupational safety in construction.
Okay, thank you, Shanthi, for very interesting presentations. I'd like to invite a question from the floor. So we have a question from the floor. It's really to do with definitions of the term that is used. if whether the term safety or safety risk control is part of resilience. Are they in the two different domain, or how that these two terms actually interact?
Yeah, so sorry, can you hear me?
Yes,
yeah.
Sure.
So resilience is essentially about the guided adaptability of behaviors. And so safety risk control, it essentially overlaps with resilience, because resilience essentially informs and shapes the risk of control, and that's usually more present in dynamic situations. Does that help?
Yeah, I mean, probably I try to to interpret resilience in different way. To me, resilience is the ability to bounce back. So we have a Mark 1 resilience, means that ability to bounce back to the previous status, previous level of resilience. Whereas Mark 2 resilience is ability to improve from the the previous status, which is something that is improvement to from the level before it's being struck by an event or some sort of occurrence of events or safety issues there. So how that relate with the more general definition of resilience?
Sorry, you were breaking. Could you repeat the first part? I caught the last part of your sentence.
Yeah, so we have, to my understanding, resilience is about ability to bounce back, and ability to bounce back to where. So we have Mark 1 resilience is resilient to bounce back, ability to bounce back to the previous level of resilience, whereas the Mark 2 resilience is about ability to bounce back to an improvement to the previous level before it being struck by a disaster or an event, disruptive event. So in your definition here, how that link up with my current understanding of resilience? Is there anything that might be related or might be associated with it?
Yeah, so resilience is essentially about enhancing the ability to succeed. So one part of it is definitely recovering, bouncing back from incidents and failures, but it's not about eliminating the errors, but it's about increasing the probability of the likelihood to succeed. So understanding the everyday variations of behavior, and understanding how we can enhance that adaptive capacity and how we can guide it and enable it to increase the likelihood of success.
Mm-hmm. So, I mean, in your interview, do you how did you actually explain this term resilient, or you didn't mention any term of resilience? Because resilience for some people are pretty aliens. They're not into that sort of same understanding with the term. So, how did you actually run your interview?
So these were actually semi-structured interviews. So we didn't mention resilience, but we kind of, I let the participants lead the discussion and just talk about safety in general and how they talk about safety and understand safety in their context, in their working environment. So, and we used discourse analysis. So essentially humans use language to make sense of their world, and the discourses reflect the subjective and shared understandings. And so it influences how we develop our understandings and what we do and how we act. And so in terms of how I came to resilience engineering, so I transcribed and coded the data in a thematic and discursive way to reveal what was said and how it was said. And that how was critical because it revealed the nuances, essentially, of how people understand reality and act in it. And it was kind of a bottom-up approach. I didn't prescribe the resilience engineering in the interviews, but it was drawn from the interviews, and that essentially reflected how resilience is actually innate in construction, and provided to that body of literature that it just provided more empirical evidence that there is potential for resilience in construction, but it also has its challenges, as we saw in the presentation.
Okay, so we have a comment or observation from Pearson and Roy here as well. I think the in line with my previous question. So resilience might be dependent on the experience and knowledge of the safety professionals. Is there any evidence that support the experience and knowledge of the safety professional in terms of how they enact upon resilience?
Sorry, could you repeat that question?
You see in the chat there, I just wondering whether, May asking about whether is there any evidence that support whether the resilient engineering is dependent on experience and knowledge of safety professionals.
So if you recall to one of, I think, the second last slide about resilience already in the system, and I gave the example of supervisors, their role in construction, it's very important. They kind of bridge the gap between what goes on in the office and how it translates to on site. So definitely, so an example is, I remember a supervisor, they kind of compared themselves to a psychologist, how they need to be a psychologist because they need to, how they make up the gangs, they need to understand how the different operatives work with each other, and those kind of things. And that's definitely down to experience. The knowledge of what needs to happen on site and in the depot, for example, and how they interact with each other. And so as in experience definitely helps. Knowledge and experience definitely helps to build this resilience, but that can be learnt, essentially. So there's always a capacity for organizations to essentially become resilient.
Mm-hmm. So do you think that do you find any reference or anything that been mentioned in the interview in terms of whether the resilience here encompass individual resilience or system resilience, or is it to do with the whole organization resilience, or are you kind of having interpret the resilience as a whole, or is it there is some reference to resilience to individual levels and relationship between workers in the gangs, or is it organization? Is there any evidence on that?
I think there's evidence of both, definitely on an individual level, particularly because it also depends on attitudes and mindsets as well, as to how flexible people can be. But then, as in, it starts at the top level. So senior managers, you can see that they do encourage a sort of flexibility. They don't necessarily want people to follow the rules, like the black and white rules, if it doesn't call for it. They need to use their observation skills, for example, to adapt on site. So, and if that's translated from the top level down, but then there's challenges in that, like it relates to the bureaucracy of safety. People might not feel that they should be. They don't know whether it's right or wrong to kind of work around the rules, the prescribed rules, because of a fear of the consequences of what might happen if something was to go wrong. So if something was to go right and they'd worked around the rules, that may not lead to an incident, and they'll be comfortable that they can be adaptive in that sense. But then if they did something that if they worked around the rules and an incident happened, then they would be punished most likely, because it's why didn't you follow the rules? So it's kind of about past experiences, but I think construction is moving towards that whole just culture and understanding that there is like that, essentially understanding that adaptive behavior, it's about embracing flexibility, and it's not necessarily about disobedience, because people they don't go out to get hurt or anything. They all have the same goal. They want to get home at the end of the day, so they're acting in their best interest, and they adapt in the way that they think is acceptable.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think there's a further comment or observation from Roy. Roy, you can ask question if you wish. You know, we are at the moment in the discussion forms mode, so you can unmute your microphone, ask questions if you wish. But really, what Roy actually commenting here is hi Roy, yeah.
Oh, hello. Can you hear me?
Yes, we can. Oh, I can.
Okay, great. Yes. Now I know how to unmute myself. So yeah. So about the resilience and the safety, I'm just keep thinking about these two terms. So for safety, I feel we've talked a lot more about the human beings' health and safety as in the construction management. But in your resilience engineering, do you refer to both the infrastructure resilience or also human beings' resilience, or more towards one over the other?
Yeah, so resilience, it applies to both the structure. It's about it's the interactions between humans and technology or technical systems. They don't operate in isolation, but it is about humans, the resilience of humans.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, thank you, Roy. So I'm conscious about time now, and okay, thanks for a bit of discussion there. So let's move on to the next presentations. So our next paper is entitled Conceptualizing Self-Determination Theory as an Indicator for Improving Construction Worker Motivation by Kenneth, Lawani, Hare, and Iain Cameron. So I'll play the recorded now.
This study is about conceptualizing self-determination theory as an indicator for improving construction worker motivation by Kenneth Lawani, Hare, and Iain Cameron. The study focuses on assessing the motivation of construction operatives on the issues of health and safety in the workplace. It reflects on the bottom-up approach based on the perception of construction operatives regarding their roles, and we wanted to characterize the types and the levels of motivation by adopting a valid and a reliable framework. So we used the self-determination theory as our own framework for this study. The study looked at the different characteristics from the lack of motivation, which we grouped within the red category. This is when workers lack any intention or the drive to do things or accomplish their set tasks safely. The amber phase, which is the extrinsic motivation, is when a worker engages in an activity or task to obtain an outcome that is discrete from the activity itself. The green phase, which is the intrinsic motivation, is when a worker has a positive experiences that gives them pleasure in the work that they do, that supports their growth within the workplace and satisfies their health and safety needs. Using the red, amber, green health and safety motivation continuum, which is superimposed on the self-determination theory framework, the red signifies lack of motivation, which predicates an unacceptable behavior from the worker. It could be as a result of incompetence, lack of task control, or lack of interest or unwillingness in the roles that they are given to undertake. This is classed as the non-self-determined phase along the continuum. The amber signifies extrinsic motivation, which is a form of a tolerable behavior regarding their work. This could be due to the result of being compliant in their work activities, It could be as a result of fines or because of the money that they earn or their ability to be promoted to the next level, or working because of the support that they need to give to their families or the ego. There's nothing wrong with this. We class this as a controlled motivation, and it's a tolerable phase that workers can be in, but any organization will be looking towards moving the workers from this amber phase to the green phase, where they become more self-determined or they are autonomously motivated, which is a broadly acceptable behavior. So within the intrinsic phase or the green phase, it signifies that the intrinsic motivation that the workers exhibit is broadly acceptable, and this is based on their inherent satisfaction within their workplace. This can still be classed as exhibiting what is referred to as citizenship safety behavior. So the workers go above and beyond what is required of them within their workplace. This study adopted a phenomenological approach, and the participants were construction operatives and supervisors that were willing to share their own health and safety experiences of what actually motivates them. We adopted a semi-structured open-ended interviews to allow for the emergence of themes from the operatives and supervisors. The interviews assess the operatives' description and their perception of their workplace health and safety initiatives and their motivation for their roles. These were further mapped into the self-determination theory continuum by adopting the traffic light red, amber, green system. The findings indicate that none of the 22 workers showed any signs of lack of motivation, but there were discrepancies, however, amongst the workers either undertaking their roles for extrinsic reasons or doing it for intrinsic reasons that are health and safety, based on the health and safety related factors. 10 workers did discuss issues that were considered or grouped as extrinsic motivation within the amber phase, and this was in relation to their family, to the money they earn, to their ability to be promoted within the workplace. One of the quotes was like, "I work for my kids, and that's why I work away from home." 12 workers discussed issues of intrinsic motivation that is within the green phase, and this was related to them being happy in their workplaces, enjoying the work that they do, and having some sort of satisfaction in their workplaces. A quote was like, "It makes me feel good knowing that I am doing the job safely." Workers that are extrinsically motivated tend to demonstrate improved safety compliance. The operatives comply with health and safety rules because of their awareness of the current prosecutions for health and safety breaches. They do or they undertake their roles because they want to provide for their families or to keep up with their mortgages or other financial commitments. Also, they rely solely on working together within their group or within their team, while those workers that are intrinsically motivated tend to be workers that are on a permanent role or permanent contract. They consider health and safety as a priority in their day-to-day activities. They involve their colleagues so that everyone within the workplace have this sense of purpose. They are passionate about their role or their work, and they show this high level of enthusiasm in the delivery of their project safely. They see management goal setting and involvement as something that is positive within the workplace. At the same time, they consider these bottom-up safety initiatives as the opportunity for the workers or the operatives and supervisors to bring up their own ideas so that it can be implemented within the workplace. Finally, the study tends to show that some construction workers still undertake some tasks despite evidence of their lack of competence or lack of motivation based on their behaviors in relation to health and safety. Workers that were identified as showing positive attitude to their task and health and safety values need to be fully supported and engaged within their workplace. Workers that demonstrate extrinsic motivational qualities should be engaged and empowered towards becoming more autonomously motivated or self-determined, so they don't go back towards the non-self-determined phase or the lack of motivation. Incentivizing workers' motivation for objectives such as productivity and safety might not necessarily lead to enhanced motivation on the longer term or an improvement in occupational safety and health practices within the workplace. If you need more information, you can read the paper itself and it will give you more detail of what the study is all about. Thank you.
Thank you, Kenneth, for a very interesting presentation. So I'll change the mode to a discussion now, so the audience can ask the question directly if they wish. Roy, you make an interesting comment there. Do you want to ask questions?
Okay. Hi, can you hear me?
Yes, I can.
Okay, yeah, great. Thank you for your great presentation, Kenneth. It was actually just to echo one of the previous audience about the experience level from the previous presentation when we talk about the resilience or the safety. So usually we think experience is a good thing. It will help workers behave more safely and following the safety regulations. Just some of my previous studies showing in some cases, the experienced workers may be overconfident on their capability and rely on their past experiences. So they might be more likely to underestimate the safety risks. So how would you consider the intervention of either through safety training, education, or other ways to really balance the workers from their different experience levels or other demographic factors, if we consider these are all kind of personal demographic factor?
Yeah, Roy, the thing about experience in relation to health and safety can be very fluid. In a lot of cases, you expect someone who's got years of experience or wealth of experience to actually adhere to the safety regulations, but these are some of the guys that do take things for granted. And looking at your chart as well, yes, there is a distinct pattern between guys that are just coming into the industry just now and the older generations or the dinosaurs that fail to make a change. The guys that are just coming through the ranks now, from day one, they are more or less inducted into the safety initiative, and it becomes a part and parcel of how they work, the way they behave, the way they think. And that buying into the culture of the organization is really important. For the older generations, I don't believe training changes behavior most of the time. So you train someone and then you let them go, they will still end up doing the same. It's more about engaging them, having someone who is, or someone who you can recognize to be a safety champion, to engage with them for them to see the realization that they need to adopt some changes or adapt to the current trends of how things are being done. So, I mean, I think that's my own subjective opinion about it, but I mean, conducting this study as well, I met up because I was directly involved. I met up with a lot of workers, but I was looking at it from the bottom up, specifically looking at supervisors and operators, because I consider there are a lot of work that's been done around motivation and engagement has been looking at it from the top to the bottom. So as I felt there was a gap looking at it from the perspective of the operatives and the supervisors. And it was really intriguing to hear different, point of view from operatives that were employees and from operatives that were workers. So, I mean, we need to get this fact right, that when we are classing people using workers and employees, employees will be those that are on the payroll, that have got maybe a permanent contract. A worker can be a contractor or someone who's on a part-time work. Their behavior or their ways that they address safety initiatives or adopt safety initiatives can be quite different. And these are some of the points we picked up from this study. And that goes a long way to impact their motivational reasons or the way they do things within their organizations or their places of work.
Okay, thank you. If I may quickly follow up. So in your study of the three different categories, the green, the amber, and the red, so do these have something to do with these demographic factors of workers, such as experience, such as their trade or their level of in the position?
Well, when we looked at the self-determination theory, and to put it into context so that it's easy to understand, we needed to map it into the traffic light system, which is generally used all over the world. So we know that if we put someone, when you say someone is in the green zone, yeah, it tells them they are doing something right, and when they are in the red zone, they are doing something a bit wrong. But what we looked at here was that the organizations that got their workers to be involved in this study, basically we told them we wanted workers that were aware of health and safety programs that were in place or involved in their workplace health and safety programs, or workers that were proactive. So in terms of the culture within these organizations, yeah, I wouldn't say, well, it's over the top, but they had health and safety. They took health and safety as a priority in the work that they do. So the workers basically had this understanding of it. So I don't know if I've answered your question, but that was a baseline for involvement in this study. So we didn't really go too much into the demographics of the workers themselves, although we involved workers all around the UK, mostly London, Glasgow, Aberdeen, Manchester, and other parts of the world. I think other parts of the country. The only places we didn't go was Wales and Northern Ireland.
Okay, thanks, Kenneth and Roy for the discussion. So talking about top-down and bottom-up is always interesting to me. And you mentioned briefly about top-down and bottom-up issues. And if we talk about safety, it's a lot of a top-down sort of regime or initiatives or regulations that going to govern how the workers behave, or how the worker actually perceive safety itself. Have you found any evidence, something that shape the motivations of the workers from the top-down perspectives?
From the top-down perspective, what basically happens is that it's ideologies that the senior management do tend to have about things that are not working, and most of the time they don't roll it out to the shop floor for the workers to actually bring in their own perspectives or their points of view around how things can be changed, not just changed, but how it can be implemented over a long term. So most of the time, the top-down initiatives gets to a certain level within the ranks where it becomes not applicable or unacceptable by the workers because they were not basically talked through or involved or engaged in those initiatives. So most times it tends to fail at the shop floor level. And that is why when you see that workers on the shop floor see senior managers or safety managers coming onto the site, they have different signs and languages that they use to inform each other that the big boss is coming or the bird is in the air, things like that. But when you tend to engage workers around initiatives like this, telling them to bring their own understanding and contributing and engaging them, making them feel to be a part of a team, and it can work wonders, because for them they see that the initiatives that have been rolled out is something coming out of their own kind of like out of themselves. So they are happy to champion it. They are happy to implement it, and they're happy to see it work, most especially when you assign them into specific roles to take ownership of such initiatives.
Mm-hmm. So, why? I mean, I'm a little bit go a little bit further in terms of why the worker would like to jump, much beyond what is required. And this is something that always, be a question to me, in terms of why should they do something beyond what, I think the issue about improving, safety, as an industry is a role of the managers, not the workers. And why should they be motivated to do more than what is required? And this is something that might be you find some evidence or some evidence or passage in your interview.
Yeah, some workers just don't believe in this compliance where you just do the bare minimum.
Mm-hmm.
And I think this is something that itself, not because the organization wants them to do it. I think it's just, I'll use an example of our own kind of like our own field. In our jobs, we have people that are just lecturers that are not really interested or passionate about undertaking research. And I think doing a research is something that comes or that becomes a passion of yours personally if your organization doesn't put a kind of like a remit for you to do it. It's the same way that it is within the workplace. Some workers will go above and beyond what is required because they're just passionate to do it, or they just can't see things go wrong. And when you look at these types of workers, they are the ones that know that the organization takes them seriously. They are the ones that know that they are not tied to a short-term contract. They know that there's a job guarantee or there's a future in the work that they do. And when you compare them to workers that are just there on a short-term basis, or workers that are peripatetic, moving from one job to another, for some of them, it's about earning money. They just earn money and move on to another project or another contract. So why should they be really bothered about going above and beyond or doing what more than is required of them? So there are so many factors that that comes into play here, and it goes into the psychology of the person themselves, really.
Mm-hmm. Okay, I think we are beyond the time allocated for this session. So I think I wish to thanks to the three presenters, and also to Niraj, who is moderating the technical side of it, and also for the participant, including Roy, who's been asking questions as well. So thank you, and see you again in the next sessions.
Thank you.
Thank you. Bye-bye.